Seeing the presenter view now?
No, but we did just a minute ago.
Yeah, I think it's probably just taking a long time to load is why, Dawn, you can see it, but we can't.
Okay, well, I don't want this to have to drag on forever for you guys. Should I just try to speak my way through it and we'll see if this thing catches up?
Sure.
It is, yeah, gonna be a little challenging. Okay, if you can see this slide, I'd be showing you where the placer mining sites in the Pacific Northwest are. And in Northeast Oregon is the Southern Blue Mountains, which had considerable deposits. And in the southern part of that is the John Day Mining District. And then we would zoom in to the John Day Mining District and show Canyon Mountain, Little Canyon Mountain actually, and that is the mother lode, the location where the geologic location where the gold formed. And then after eons of erosion spreading through the local creeks and into the John Day River Valley itself were the alluvial deposits where the placer mining took place, which is mostly what the Chinese miners were working on. And I'm gonna tell a story here.
Hey, Dawn,
yeah.
Hit from beginning one more time, because I don't even think it's loading on our hand. So we're not even seeing any advancement or anything.
Okay.
Yeah, oh, there. Whatever you just did, just go from there.
Okay. So what I said, placer mining in the red circle is the northeast, the Southern Blue Mountains of northeastern Oregon, where there were quite a few placer deposits. This is showing the zeroing in on the Blue Mountains, showing a handful of the sites, some of the Chinese sites and some other areas where there were Chinatowns between Baker City and John Day. That's about 60 miles as the crow flies. And again, I'm going to focus in on the John Day Mining District. We're still seeing my show?
Yep, we're seeing it. It's just
okay, thank you. Yeah, just interrupt if something goes wrong again. Thank you very much. So this is zeroing in where the John Day Mining District is, and where I just put the down in the lower right is Little Canyon Mountain. That was the primary geologic location of the gold deposits. And then with erosion, except where did that go? There we are. With erosion over millennia, gold was free gold was deposited in the gravels and boulders of the stream channels all through the Canyon Creek and some of the other creeks going into the John Day basin up on top, John Day River system on top. So there we go. Gold was discovered in Canyon City in 1862. That started the gold rush in this area. And the town of Canyon City cropped up soon afterwards. And then about 2 miles away along Canyon Creek at the mouth of the John Day River, a little settlement of John Day started about 1866. 3 or 4 years later, it got enough commercial buildings there to be referred to as John Day City in the associated mining documents. Oh boy. So, The Tale of Two Cities, I did steal that title. This will be talking about John Day and Canyon City. And so the first local history was published in 1902 for Baker, Grant, Malheur, and Harney counties. And in that, it talks about, it says, after the destruction of the Chinese portion of Canyon City by fire in 1885, and the subsequent refusal of residents of that place to allow the Chinese to rebuild, they removed to John Day and added their numbers to the Chinese settlement already there. Thus, quite a large Chinese town grew up, which at one time numbered between 500 and 600 inhabitants. So offhand, nothing seems too wrong with that statement until you dig a little deeper. In 1979, Barlow and Richardson published a small booklet called China Doctor of John Day. They were asked by the city of John Day to come and participate in opening the Kam Wah Chung building. So they did some background history on that. It's an interesting document. It doesn't have a lot of references and stuff, so it's hard to track down where they got things. they clearly based their story here on that 1901 history, but then added to it. So what they said is when the Chinese had come to dominate the mining there in the 1870s, they had built a Chinatown, an area of Chinese stores and small shacks adjoining Canyon City. There were a series of fires in the area, and it seemed likely that tension between the disgruntled whites and the Chinese was at least partly responsible for both frequency of the fires and the often lackadaisical response of the white-controlled firefighting apparatus. I'm going to continue the story in a second, but I'm just going to stop right here and note that. So they're saying that there were a whole series of fires, not just the one fire that was talked about in 1901, and that they are implying that they may have been arson caused, or certainly something in the poor relationship between the whites and the Chinese. The Chinese were driven out. Obviously, across the West, there were some very bad things happening around that time period for the Chinese, and they talk about those beforehand, leading to this assumption that maybe the same thing was happening here. There's nothing in the newspapers or any other accounts to back up this statement or this assumption. So the story continues. Finally, in February of 1885, the Chinatown, which may have had close to 1,000 inhabitants, burned completely. Local authorities would not allow the Chinese to rebuild, so they moved down the creek several miles to Lower Town, or other town, the community that would become John Day. So a couple things jump out if you know the local history. One, it's not several miles, it's 2 miles between John Day and Canyon City. A minor point, but you'd think the authors would have understood that. And then it was already referred to as John Day by 1866. So they're kind of mushing up part of the history there, part of the early history. But more significantly, luckily, we do have a couple good data points with the census records on the populations in Canyon City and John Day in 1870 and 1880. So in 1870, Canyon City had 162 Chinese residents, 58% of the population, and John Day had 85 Chinese residents that accounted for 30% of the population. 10 years later, in 1880, in Canyon City, the Chinese population dropped to about half, to 84, and it was 15% of the total population, whereas John Day exploded to 359 recorded Chinese residents, which was 64% of the total population. And, so well more than half. It was more a Chinese city than it was a Euro-American city at that point. And I don't know where the 1,000 people came from, where that estimate in that first story that may perhaps up to 1,000 Chinese were living in the Chinatown there. There is nothing in the record to back that up. And one other interesting point to bring up: if the Chinese were not allowed to rebuild in Canyon City, then it's interesting that there was yet another fire in poor Canyon City, which burnt the downtown, burnt down 4 times in this. In this fire in 1898, they list all the buildings or the businesses downtown, what was lost, and then there's a note at the bottom that Chinatown was wiped out of existence. So at least the correspondent in 1898 thought Canyon City was. So if the John Day Chinatown wasn't formed or greatly enlarged after that fire in 1885, why did the Chinese move, or at least why was there a demographic shift between John Day and Canyon City? There's a real interesting 1879 newspaper account. One T.P. Bean, who clearly had some interest in the Chinese mining and was talking to folks, said that the Chinese have invested $100,000 in mining apparatus on the John Day River near this place. They take out at one sweep of the derrick between $100 and $500 and make one sweep a week. They have 14 derricks in operation now and expect to have at least 5 more this season. And I'll talk about derricks in a second. Yeah, but basically, there's a mining company is probably associated with every 1 or 2 of those derricks, with dozens of people working for each one. The amount of lumber used by them during the season is over 400,000 board feet. That would be the amount of wood that's necessary to make 25 2,000 square foot homes today. So it's a lot of lumber. It also informs us that not less than 600 Chinese are at work on the claims below John Day Town and more on the road. So what were they doing there? I think what had happened is the alluvial deposits, where the gold was at the mouth of Canyon Creek in the John Day Flat, where the John Day Chinatown and the Kam Wah Chung are, there was between 12 and 20 feet of soil built up, alluvium built up on top of the ancient riverbeds that had the gravels and the gold in them. And this showed, and so there's something called drift mining, or drift minging, if I didn't spell that right, that was probably what's going on. This is an illustration from China in the 17th century showing that type of mining. And there we go. So they put a shaft in and then do a tunnel going out from it. And so they take the shaft down till they hit the gravels and the gold, and then do a tunnel to follow the old riverbed and get the gold out of there. It's a very dangerous type of mining. They had to reinforce the loose fill above them, and that probably accounts for all the lumber they were using. And you see they're in this illustration, they're reinforcing down below. And they weren't using the derricks here, they were using something like a windlass that was basically a big reel to haul up buckets of material from the mining site. So I tried to find photographs of what John Day, the mining there would have looked like, but was unsuccessful. But I found this from California from the 1850s, late 1850s, and it shows a derrick. So you have that central mast, and then there's a boom put out from it. And that boom can swing around that mast using the cables and stuff you see established there. These apparently were run by water wheels. There's a water wheel in the background. And we have records of numerous water wheels in John Day area that were probably used to run these derricks. And then there's the shaft right there going down. And then they lift material out from the shaft, swing it out of the way, and then drop it into these piles all over, which should leave a pretty strong archaeological footprint of what they were doing. I've tried to find that in John Day. Again, I can't see the pictures. Here's an 1885 lithograph, really kind of photograph. And the Chinatown is off to the left of this picture, off the picture. But there are these flumes you can see built crossing through town there. Bringing water down into the mining area off to the left. There's also piles of tailings left from the mining, both in the foreground there, but interestingly back behind the town in the John Day floodplain. And I think those are probably where that mining was, partly where that mining was taking place. Plus it extended about 7 or 8 miles downstream to the left over at least a few decades. So out in the national forest in an area, we do have an area that we know was mined using derricks. It was actually, in this case, a white-owned mining company that did hire Chinese laborers out in the area of Superville, Elk Creek. And these tailings piles are quite a bit more robust than ones done when all of the tailings are moved by hand. These are 15 to 20 feet tall, but there's nothing like this in the John Day area today. And here's why there's nothing like that in the John Day area today. Starting in the late 1800s, early 1900s, dredges were built in one end, and these things spent a couple decades in there grinding up the whole river bottom and destroying any evidence of the previous mining operations, unfortunately for us. I'm hoping somewhere I'll find a little corner of that got missed, but I haven't seen it yet. So, all the money. Chinese placer mining companies operating adjacent to the town of John Day were the largest local employers at this time. 10 Chinese stores. This is from that same newspaper article that I quoted earlier. There were 10 Chinese stores in John Day, and as the other presentations pointed out, they were probably a lot more than stores, but they did have a mercantile component. And the Kam Wah Chung was named there as one of them. It had $100,000 worth of goods, and the Hong Chung company had about $30,000 worth of goods. And the Chinese almost certainly chose to reside in John Day to the proximity of this important economic engine. And I did have figures, but I know I started late. I don't want to go on too long. About what those dollar values are. So $100,000 is really I don't have it on my fingers, a couple $1,000,000, I believe, at a low estimate of value today. So that was a large store. There was supposedly $100,000 worth of mining apparatus. Again, that would be a couple $1,000,000 investment. This was a big economic engine. We have some of the lease agreements where the ranchers that had homesteaded the land out in the John Day Basin there were leasing the rights to Chinese companies to do the mining operations there. And they were getting multiple thousands of dollars, which would have been in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So there was a lot of money coming in, both for the Chinese and then being spread to the local. So cultural amnesia. So the physical erasure of the extensive Chinese placer mining operations around John Day mirrored the cultural erasure of the Chinese contributions to the economic and social development modern state of Oregon. And I have shamelessly included another picture of the Oregon Historical Quarterly that just came out that has a paper where I talk about more examples of this, and there are some other stellar reports, and that's what I got.